Okay, so one more thing about for loops, actually two more things, but the first off is that for loops work incredibly well with strings because it turns out they use the same numbering system that we're used to. So strings, so say we have this string, for example, computer. Well, this is numbered, of course, the spots are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, oh geez. This is numbered 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It has a length of 8. So the setup for loops is exactly what you're going to be doing. So to loop through a string, it should look very familiar. So we start with I equals 0. But what we can do is, without even knowing what's in the string, we can do I is less than CPU dot length. Remember, that tells you how long the string is. So here the length is 8. This means your I is going to go 0, then 1, oops, 0, then 1, then 2, then all the way up to 7. It stops. It goes until while we're less than 8. So as long as we go up by 1, this will automatically go through each character in the string. Okay, so this is each character in the string. So it starts at C, then O, then M. Okay, and that's the locations. So say I want to do something like, I don't know, count how many E's are in the string. So let's say I want to count how many E's in the string. So to look at letter I, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the substring from I to I plus 1. So I'm going to look at substring 0 to 1, the C, and then substring 1 to 2, the O, then substring 2 to 3, the M, all the way up to substring 7 to 8, which doesn't include 8, so it's just the R. So what I can do is I can just look at each individual letter and say, okay, if, so CPU.substring from I to I plus 1, if that equals, then say, I don't know, like an E. Let's count how many E's there are. Okay, then let's have some count variable. So I'll need to declare that up here. So int count equals 0. So what this is doing is looping through. I'm starting at spot 0, and I'm looking at each letter individually in the string until I get to the end. And then if that individual letter is an E, I'm going to add 1 to some count. And then after I'm done with the loop, then I should just go ahead and print out how many there actually are. So I'll print out the count. Okay. So, and we'll see, of course, there's just 1 here. But if I change the length, of course, this updates automatically. I've added 6, so it should be 7. But now this string's length changes, so it should go through and give me the proper count of 7. Okay, cool. So that's how you loop through a string. Very powerful. The same setup as starting at 0, less than the length. Works out really nicely with strings. Okay, one more thing you might want to do is maybe I want to reverse a string, like in the extra credit of your palindrome lab. Of the Wild Lab. So if you want to reverse a string, you can go backwards through it. Okay, so instead of going up by 1 every time, I'm going to do I minus minus to go down 1 every time. Okay, so I'm going to do the same setup. So let's do another string. So let's do my original string as a new string. Let's say heart high. Okay. Yeah, so what I want to do is I want to start not at 0, but I want to start at the last position in the string. So not the length of the string, because that'd be out of bounds, but the length minus 1. Right, because if the length is 9, it's characters 0 through 8, so I want to start 8. So I'm going to start at og.length minus 1. And I'm going to do, instead of, okay, so I'm going to go all the way back to 0. When I get to 0, I'm going to stop. So I'm going to go that I is greater than or equal to 0. And then I'm going to do an I minus minus, so I go backwards there. So let's go ahead and do this. So what we'll see now, I'm going to go backwards through it. So maybe let's just print out 1 letter at a time, just so we can see. This is not actually going to reverse it, of course, but we'll see it prints these out 1 letter at a time. So we do og.substring, I to I plus 1, same way to just get 1 letter at a time. And when we run this, this will give me the letters of the string backwards, which is fine. But what I want to do is I want to add those together. So I don't want that. I want to add 1 letter at a time to some total variable. So let's call this like my answer. So I'm going to start my answer as blank. Answer starts blank. So string temp, let's say temp equals a string, and I'm going to start out blank. And every time I want to add that new letter to it. So instead of printing this out, I'm just going to add it on. So I'll do temp, And it's kind of like keeping a total count. I'm setting it to what it was before plus that one letter at a time. Excuse me. So what we'll see, and I'm just going to print this out every time through so we can see it. If we just print out temp, it's going to start with an H, and then we're going to add on the G. And then the next time through, it's going to be HG plus the I. And then it's HGI plus the next H. And then I'll add the space, and then the T. So I'm going backwards and just adding one at a time on the end, and we'll see we'll build it up over time. And this will give us the backward version, and we kind of see how it gets created. So it's the H, then the HG, and it works its way all the way back until it's Hagai Tra. Okay, so that's how you can go backwards through a string. And this might be useful to you if you want to go backwards to a string or a list or something. There'll be plenty of times we want to do that. One more thing. Watch out for infinite loops. So just like infinite loops can happen with a while loop, they can happen with a for loop too. So if you get, for example, your I equals 0. Well, let's do this. Like say we start at 10, and then say we do like I is, I don't know, like you're trying to go backwards, but you're kind of messing it up. So you go like, well, I is greater than or equal to 0, but then you do an I plus plus. So you might hopefully be able to immediately see what's going to happen. After every time through, it's going to add 1 to I, but I is always greater than or equal to 0, right? So if you're trying to go backwards, you do an I plus plus, you're going to get stuck in this infinite loop because I just goes 10, 11, 12, 13, and those numbers are always greater than or equal to 0. So that's just something to be aware of with for loops. Just make sure that the while condition still is valid and still works okay. All right, so I'll comment that out, obviously, so we don't crash our program every time. The next thing I wanted to do that I've heard some people asking about already, what if I want to do a for loop in a for loop? And you might think this is worthless. Of course, it's nowhere near. But think about this like from a visual perspective. Think about it with matrices. So I'm going to look at a matrix, like thinking back to algebra but here. So here's a matrix with rows and columns. You have one loop to go through each of the rows. Your outer loop is going to say, okay, I'm going to go through row 0 and then row 1. And then your inner one is going to go, for instance, through like, okay, column 1, column 2, column 3. And then you start over. Column 1, column 2, column 3. And then you start over. So that's kind of the setup there. For how that's working. So you have the rows are going through the outer one, and then inside that row, you have another loop to go through the columns within. And then after the row you reset, you go back to the first column, the second column, third column. Then you go to the next row, first column, second column, third column. The next row, first column, second column, third column. So that's how you want to visualize. Like you have one to go through the horizontal rows, and then another for loop to loop through the columns within that row. So let me show you what that might look like. Okay, so say you have these are called nested for loops. A for loop in a for loop. Okay, so let's say I want to have, for instance, I don't know, like, what do I want to say? Let's say we want to have 5 rows. And let's say 10 columns in each row. Okay, so if I go ahead and do this, so for int I equals 0. I want 5 rows. I'm going to do I as less than 5, and then I'll do an I plus plus. Okay, now within that row, I'm going to have another j. So within row I want to go across j times. Okay, so what I'm going to do is for int j equals 0, j is not j times, I want to go across 10 times, sorry. So my j is going to go starting at 0, go less than 10, and same thing, I'll go up by 1 every time. And just to kind of show you what's going on, I'm going to print these two out. So I'm going to print out, okay, I'm going to print out like I, and then maybe I'll print out a comma, and then I'll print out j, and then I'll put in maybe like a couple spaces here. Okay. So we'll see what happens here. We're going to see, because I use a print line, they're on a bunch of different lines. So let's go ahead and clean that up. Let's just do a print so we can see. Well, actually, let's examine this. Okay, so what you see is I starts at 0. So on I is 0, it goes through the loop. Now j is 0, then j is 1, then 2. So it doesn't get back here. It just kind of is stuck within this inner loop for a while. J goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once j gets up to 9, it prints it out, it's not less than 10. So then it goes back here and restarts this. So now I is 1. And then we get back to the inner loop and this resets. So every time through the outer loop, this resets. So what happens here, this goes a total of 5 times 10, which is 50 times. But what happens basically is like I is 0, and then your j goes 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 9. And then the next time through, I is 1, and then your j goes 0, 1, 2, 3, up to 9. And then you reset again. So I is 2, and then your j goes 0 up to 9, and so forth. Okay, so anyway, let's try and clean this up a little bit. Let's use a print instead of a print line to get it all out on one line. And that actually is pretty crappy. So one thing I might want to do is, like, after I finish a row, I might want to kind of hit enter and go down to the next one here. So basically, after I finish a row, so I've looped through all the columns. So when I is 0, I've gone through all the columns, all the values of j. And then after I print a column, I might want to go to the next line. So I could just do a system.out.println, because that'll just print out a blank line to this screen. And that'll basically actually have my answer print out really nicely and kind of look like a coordinate grid, right? So I'm in row 0, I go through all the columns, and then I print a blank line. And then I go back up here. Now I++, now I is 1. I go through all the columns, and so forth. And I just use I and j for whatever. You could use whatever variable names make sense to you. Anyway, so those are nested for loops, good to think about. Hope this helped, guys, and I'll see you in class.